Hello, in this Excel tutorial video for Chem 1B, we'll be looking at the next part of the Experiment 7 data workup, mainly the standardization of the weak acid and weak base solutions. I've gone ahead and I've entered the data in. We just finished up our standardization of hydrochloric acid, and before that the standardization of hydroxide. And the calculations here are going to be very similar. In this first example, this was our weak acid standardization. This was our standardization of C2H3O2, our acetic acid. We added 25 milliliters of acid using a volumetric pipette. So in this case, 0.00. The initial volume should also carry 2 decimal places, and our final burette reading should carry 2 decimal places. So I've adjusted the significant figures that are displayed using the increase and decrease decimal points. Normally you ought to have non-zero digits in that last reading, but in this case it looks like the student didn't read the burette properly. Okay, first step was to calculate a volume of titrant added. That's our sodium hydroxide titrant, and that was equal to the final volume minus the initial volume. You'll see that calculation show up again and again. And we're going to use that volume of titrant and the known concentration to calculate the moles of acid, and with the moles of our acetic acid and the volume of acetic acid we can calculate a concentration. So here we're going to enter moles of sodium hydroxide, and that's going to be equal to the volume times the concentration. And the concentration was over here on the left side. This is the average concentration of our standardization titrations. And I'm going to hit F4 because I want that cell reference to stay fixed. In this case it won't matter too much given it's a single run. And to deal with the milliliters I need to divide by 1,000. Okay, and that gives me the moles of sodium hydroxide that I've added in that titration. I can use that to calculate the moles of acetic acid, and the moles of acetic acid is going to be equal to the moles of hydroxide. If you do the balanced chemical reaction for the neutralization of acetic acid using sodium hydroxide, you'll get a 1-to-1 reaction stoichiometry. And finally, we can calculate the concentration of acetic acid as the moles divided by the volume of acid. Now remember that volume was in milliliters, so we need to do a quick unit conversion, multiply by 1,000, and we get 0.11 molar acetic acid. We can do the same thing with the standardization of the ammonia, NH3. We need a volume of titrant that's equal to the final volume minus the initial volume. Let's go ahead and fix some of these sig figs. You should be reading and estimating that last digit. The volume of titration then is 7.8 milliliters. From that volume of titrant, in this case we added the ammonia and we're titrating with the HCl, so this is our moles of HCl, and that's going to be equal to the volume we've added times the concentration. Okay, that concentration is fine. The volume is in milliliters, so we want to convert to liters by dividing by 1,000. And there is our moles of HCl added to the solution. We're going to use that in the balanced chemical reaction to calculate the moles of ammonia. And in this case, again, it's a 1-to-1 reaction stoichiometry, so it's simply equal to the number of moles of HCl. Finally, the last step is that concentration of ammonia is the moles of ammonia divided by the volume added. These are all simple arithmetic operations that I'm throwing in here. You need to keep track of unit conversions, and a little reality check about what the answer ought to be will help you avoid some of these errors. Okay, so that gives us an ammonia concentration of 0.035 molar. That completes the calculations, but let's do a little more work to get this so it will print out nicely. And I'm going to take these cells, I'm going to drag over them. These are going to print out to the right of my final values, and I want to move them down below because I'm going to print this out profile on a piece of paper. Sometimes it's helpful to shrink the display so you can see a little easier what's going on. And I'm going to move, let's get rid of that narrow cell there. And I'm going to move these all down. I already have my name at the top of the sheet. Oops. And now all my stuff will print out nicely if I go to Print Preview on one page. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more work. Go to Setup. On the Sheet tab, I can add grid lines and row and column headings, and that makes it print out a little easier to read, particularly if you've done any labeling of what equations you used in your calculations. That's going to complete what I'm going to do today for the standardization titrations. In the next video, we'll look at generating the simulated titration curve for our strong acid titration with a strong base.